The stagecoach lurched to a stop, sending up a cloud of dust that made Sienna Clay's eyes water. She pressed her handkerchief to her nose and waited for the driver to open the door. Her hands trembled not from the rough journey, but from anticipation. After 3 days of travel from Missouri, she had finally arrived in Hollow Bluff, Texas. "End of the line, miss," the driver called out, his voice gruff from years of shouting over wagon wheels. Sienna gathered her worn carpetbag and stepped down onto the packed earth. The town stretched before her, a single main street lined with weathered buildings, their signs creaking in the afternoon wind. The saloon stood largest among them, its bat-wing doors swaying like they'd seen 1,000 arguments and twice as many broken promises. She smoothed her best dress, a faded blue calico she'd saved for this moment, in her reticule. Folded carefully was the advertisement that had brought her here: respectable rancher seeks companionship. Woman of good character wanted for matrimony. Will provide home and security. Reply to Mr. J. Morrison, Hollow Bluff, Texas. 6 letters they'd exchanged. 6 letters filled with promises of a small ranch, Sunday dinners, and a life of quiet dignity. Sienna touched the papers through the fabric of her bag, drawing courage from them. The street was busy with afternoon traffic cowboys leading horses to the livery. Women with baskets hurrying past, a dog sleeping in the shade of the general store. None of them paid her any mind, which suited her fine. She needed to find the hotel Mr. Morrison had mentioned, where he'd meet her at 4 o'clock sharp. "Pardon me," she said to a woman passing by. "Could you direct me to the Morrison Hotel?" The woman stopped, her eyes narrowing as they took in Sienna's traveling dress and hopeful expression. "Morrison Hotel? Ain't no such place. Dear, only hotel in town is Murphy's, and that's—" She gestured vaguely down the street. "But there ain't no Morrison runs it." A cold weight settled in Sienna's stomach. "Perhaps I misunderstood. Is there a Mr. J. Morrison in town, a rancher?" The woman's expression shifted from confusion to something that might have been pity. "Oh, honey, you didn't come here on account of some advertisement, did you?" Before Sienna could answer, the woman called out to a group of men lounging outside the saloon. "Hey, boys, we got another one." The men looked up, and one of them, a young fellow with a scraggly beard, let out a whoop of laughter. "Another mail-order bride that makes 3 this month." Heat flooded Sienna's face as understanding crashed over her. The letters, the promises, all of it had been a lie. Some cruel joke played by bored men with nothing better to do than trick desperate women into traveling hundreds of miles for nothing. "Who wrote it this time?" another man called out, already laughing. "Was it you, Pike?" "No, but I wish I'd thought of it." Pike slapped his knee. "Look at her face, like she just found out Christmas ain't real deal." The laughter spread, drawing more people from the shops. Sienna stood frozen in the middle of the street, her carpetbag growing heavier by the second. She wanted to run, but where she'd spent nearly all her money on the stagecoach fare. The return ticket she couldn't afford sat like a stone in her chest. "Maybe she can work at Ruby's," someone suggested, naming what was clearly the town's sporting house. More laughter erupted. Sienna's hands clenched around her bag's handle. She would not cry. Not here, not in front of these people who found entertainment in her humiliation. She lifted her chin, prepared to walk somewhere, anywhere away from their mocking faces. "That's enough." The voice came from her left, quiet but firm. A man stepped out from the shadow of the blacksmith shop, his hat pulled low against the sun. Unlike the others, he wasn't smiling. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard for their living, with hands that showed the scars of honest labor. "Ain't hurtin' nothing. Wade," Pike protested. "Just having a bit of fun." "At her expense?" Wade Hunter, she'd remember that name later, looked at Pike with steady gray eyes. "Find your fun somewhere else." "Since when do you care about—" "Since now." Wade's voice carried no threat, just a quiet certainty that made Pike step back. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment spoiled. A few muttered under their breath, but none challenged the cowboy who stood like a wall between them and their target. When the street had mostly cleared, Wade turned to Sienna. Up close, she could see the dust on his clothes, the day's worth of stubble on his jaw. His eyes weren't unkind, just tired in a way that suggested he'd seen too much of human nature's darker side. "Need a place to sit a while?" he asked. Sienna found her voice. I need to think. I don't know where." She stopped, hating how lost she sounded. Wade nodded like he understood more than she'd said. "Martha Boone runs a boarding house. She's got a porch with shade. Won't nobody bother you there." "I can't pay." The admission burned, but she'd rather be honest than owe more than she could give. "Didn't ask you to." He turned and started walking, slow enough that she could follow if she chose. Sienna hesitated. Her mother had warned her about trusting strange men, especially in wild towns like this. But what choice did she have? She could stand here in the street until nightfall, or she could follow the one person who'd shown her a grain of kindness. She followed. Wade led her down a side street to a modest house with a wide porch and rocking chairs that had seen better days. An older woman sat in one of them, shelling peas into a bowl. "Martha," Wade said, touching his hat brim. "Lady needs a place to rest. Had a long journey." Martha Boone looked from Wade to Sienna, taking in the situation with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Another one of those advertisements?" Wade nodded. Martha's face softened. "Poor child. Come on up here, dear. There's water in the pitcher if you're thirsty." Sienna climbed the porch steps on unsteady legs. The chair Martha indicated was solid and welcoming, and she sank into it gratefully. "I'll leave you be," Wade said. He touched his hat again and turned to go. "Wait." Sienna's voice came out stronger than she expected. "Why did you help me?" Wade paused, one boot on the bottom step. "Because laughing at someone's misfortune ain't something a decent man does." He looked back at her, and she caught something in his expression, a flicker of understanding, like he knew what it felt like to be the target of cruel jokes. "You need anything, Martha knows where to find me." Then he was gone, walking back toward the main street with the easy stride of a man comfortable in his own skin. Martha resumed shelling peas, the rhythm soothing in the afternoon quiet. "That's Wade Hunter," she said conversationally. "Been in Hollow Bluff about 2 years now. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's good people." "He didn't have to do that," Sienna said, still watching the spot where he'd disappeared. "No," Martha agreed. "He didn't, but that's Wade for you. Sees something wrong, he fixes it, quiet-like, without fuss." She glanced at Sienna. "You're not the first girl to show up here with false hopes, and probably won't be the last. Some of the men in town think it's amusing. Wade's never been one of them." Sienna touched her reticule again, feeling the worthless letters inside, all those words, all those promises, nothing but ink and lies. She'd been so careful, so certain she was making a wise choice. Her position at the millinery shop in Missouri had ended when the owner's daughter married and took over. With no family to turn to and few prospects, the advertisement had seemed like providence. "What will you do now?" Martha asked gently. "I don't know." Sienna looked down at her hands, seeing the calluses from years of needlework. "I have a little money left, perhaps enough for a few days' lodging while I look for work." "Can you sew?" "Yes, I was apprenticed to a milliner for 6 years. Martha's face brightened. "Well now, that's something. Mrs. Garrett at the general store has been complaining about needing help with alterations. Might be she'd hire you on." Hope, fragile as a soap bubble, rose in Sienna's chest. "Do you think she would—" "Can't hurt to ask. Tell her Martha sent you." The older woman set aside her bowl and stood. "Come on inside. You look like you could use a cool drink and something to eat." "No." She held up a hand when Sienna started to protest. "No arguments. Can't have you fainting in the street. That would really give those fools something to laugh about." As Sienna followed Martha into the blessed coolness of the house, She thought about Wade Hunter. She'd known cowboys back in Missouri Loud, brash men who treated women like possessions or playthings. But Wade had been different, quiet, respectful. He'd helped her without expecting anything in return. Maybe not all cowboys were the same after all. The thought surprised her. She'd carried her prejudices for so long, ever since her mother had run off with a smooth-talking cattleman when Sienna was 6, leaving her to be raised by reluctant relatives. Cowboys were trouble. She'd always believed. They promised the moon and delivered dust. But Wade Hunter had promised nothing except a place to sit, and he delivered exactly that. As Martha bustled about preparing food, Sienna allowed herself a moment to close her eyes and breathe. She was stranded in a strange town with little money and no prospects, the victim of a cruel joke. But she was also alive, unharmed, and had found unexpected kindness in an unlikely place. It wasn't the new beginning she'd hoped for, but perhaps it was a beginning nonetheless. The next morning came too soon, bringing with it the weight of reality. Sienna sat on Martha's porch, watching the town wake up. Cowboys rode past on their way to the ranges. Shopkeepers swept their storefronts. And somewhere a rooster crowed despite the sun being well up. "I don't trust men in hats," Sienna said suddenly, surprising herself with the words. Martha, who was hanging laundry on the line, paused. "That's a peculiar thing to say in a town full of them." "My mother ran off with one, a cattle driver from Kansas. He wore a black hat with a silver band, and he could talk flowers into blooming." Sienna's fingers worried the edge of her sleeve. "She left me with my aunt and never looked back. I was 6. "That's a hard burden for a child to carry," Martha said gently. "Every man I've known since has proved her right to leave. They promise things steady work, fair wages, respect. Then they take what they want and disappear like smoke." She thought of Mr. Hartley at the millinery shop, how he'd cut her wages 3 times in 2 years, always with a reasonable excuse. Even the ones who stay find ways to leave. The sound of boots on gravel made them both look up. Wade Hunter stood at the gate, his hat in his hands, in the morning light. Sienna could see his face better weathered but not old, maybe 30 years to her 23. His hair was dark with a hint of copper where the sun caught it. "Morning, Martha, Miss Clay." He nodded to each of them. "Thought you might be thirsty." He held out a canteen, its leather sides dark with moisture. Sienna stared at it, then at him, confusion clear on her face. "It's just water," he said. "From the well at the livery. It's cleaner than most." "Why would you?" Sienna caught herself. "I'm not your responsibility, Mr. Hunter." "No, ma'am, you're not." He set the canteen on the porch step. "But being thirsty in Texas heat ain't pleasant for anybody." He turned to go, but Sienna's voice stopped him. "Cowboys are all the same, rough, reckless, and proud. You helped today, but tomorrow you'll be laughing with the others about the foolish woman who believed in fairy tales." Wade turned back slowly. His gray eyes studied her for a long moment, taking in her defensive posture, her chin lifted in challenge. Then he did something unexpected. He nodded. "You're right. Cowboys can be all those things. I've known plenty who were." He settled his hat back on his head. "Then don't trust my words. Trust how I treat you." With that, he walked away, leaving Sienna staring after him with her mouth slightly open. "Well," Martha said after a moment, "that's not a response you hear every day." Sienna picked up the canteen, surprised by its weight. The water inside was indeed cool and clean, better than what she'd had on the stagecoach. She drank deeply, hating that she needed it, hating more that he'd known she would. "Mrs. Garrett won't be at the store for another hour," Martha said, returning to her laundry. "Why don't you help me with these sheets busy hands make for quiet minds?" They worked in companionable silence, hanging clothes and linens in the rising heat. Sienna found comfort in the familiar domesticity of it. This, at least, was something she understood. When the sun climbed higher, Martha walked her to the general store. Mrs. Garrett proved to be a thin woman with sharp eyes and clever hands, the kind who could judge fabric quality by touch alone. "Martha says you can sew," she said without preamble. "Yes, ma'am. I was apprenticed to Mrs. Delacroix in St. Joseph for 6 years. I can do fine work buttonholes, embroidery, alterations, and trim work." "Show me." "Mrs." Garrett produced a man's shirt with a torn sleeve. Sienna examined the damage, then asked for needle and thread. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, creating tiny, even stitches that made the repair nearly invisible. Mrs. Garrett studied the work closely. "What about a hem?" She brought out a skirt that needed shortening. Again. Sienna worked quickly and neatly, her stitches so regular they might have been made by machine. "I suppose you'll do," Mrs. Garrett said, which Sienna was beginning to understand was high praise in Hollow Bluff. "I can pay $4 a week plus materials for your own use. You'll work in the back room, there's good light from the window. Hours are 8 to 6, half day on Saturday, closed Sunday." "Thank you," Sienna breathed. "When may I start?" "Now, if you're able. I've got a pile of mending that's been waiting for weeks." Sienna spent the rest of the day in the back room of the general store, surrounded by fabric and thread. The work was familiar, soothing even. Each completed piece was proof that she could survive here, that she didn't need false promises or lying letters. Around noon, the bell over the front door chimed. Through the doorway, Sienna could see Wade Hunter at the counter, purchasing supplies. He didn't look her way, didn't acknowledge her presence, but when he left, Mrs. Garrett brought back a wrapped packet. "That cowboy left this for you," she said, setting it on Sienna's work table. Inside was a sandwich, thick bread with ham and cheese and an apple. No note, no message, just food for someone who might not have any. "I don't understand him," Sienna said quietly. "Mrs. Garrett snorted. "Wade Hunter's not complicated. His ranch borders the Mackenzie spread to the north. Works hard, pays his debts, doesn't drink to excess. Helped rebuild the church after the fire last year, though he rarely attends. Some say he came here running from something, but that's true of half the town. He said to trust how he treats me, not his words." "Sounds like Wade." Mrs. Garrett returned to the front counter. "Man's got more honor in his little finger than most have in their whole body, but he's careful with it. Don't expect grand gestures or pretty speeches. That's not his way." Sienna ate the sandwich slowly, thinking. Every cowboy she'd known had been full of grand gestures and pretty speeches. They'd tipped their hats and called her darlin', and made promises as empty as their pockets after a night at the cards. Wade had done none of those things. He'd simply seen someone in need and acted. The afternoon passed quickly. Word spread that Mrs. Garrett had hired a seamstress, and several women brought in items for repair. Sienna lost herself in the rhythm of the work, grateful for the distraction from her uncertain future. As 6 o'clock approached, she helped Mrs. Garrett close the store. Her fingers ached pleasantly from the day's work, and she'd earned 50 cents, not much, but a start. "You did well today," Mrs. Garrett said. "I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Sienna walked back to Martha's boarding house, feeling more hopeful than she had since stepping off the stagecoach. She had work, a place to stay, and strange as it seemed, perhaps an ally in Wade Hunter. He was sitting on his horse near the boarding house gate, clearly waiting. When he saw her, he touched his hat brim but didn't dismount. "Heard you got the job," he said. "News travels fast. It's a small town." He shifted in the saddle, his horse dancing slightly. "Martha serves supper at 7, best food in town. If you can pay, if you can't, tell her I'll cover it." "I don't need—" "Didn't say you did, but going hungry helps no one, and Martha needs the business." He turned his horse. "Evening, Miss Clay." She watched him ride away. Frustration and something else, gratitude, maybe warring in her chest. He kept doing these things, Small kindnesses that asked nothing in return. It went against everything she believed about men like him. At dinner, she tried to pay Martha with her 50 cents, but the older woman waved it away. Wade already settled your account for the week. No. She held up a hand at Sienna's protest. Take it up with him if you must, but that man's got more money than he knows what to do with and no family to spend it on. Let him feel useful. I don't want to be anyone's charity case. Then don't be. Martha served her a plate of stew and cornbread. Pay him back when you can, if it makes you feel better. But don't let pride make you foolish. You've had enough hardship without adding hunger to it. After dinner, Sienna sat on the porch in the cooling evening air. Other boarders came and went: a traveling merchant, an old prospector who paid his rent in tall tales, a widow who worked at the hotel. They nodded politely but didn't intrude on her solitude. She thought about Wade's words that morning. Trust how I treat you. It was such a simple thing, yet so different from what she was used to. No flowery promises, no elaborate courtship, just quiet acts of care that expected nothing in return. Maybe that was the difference. The men who'd hurt her, starting with the cattle driver who'd stolen her mother, had all wanted something. They'd helped only when it served their purposes, been kind only as long as it got them what they desired. But what could Wade Hunter possibly want from a stranded seamstress with 50 cents to her name? As darkness fell over Hollow Bluff, Sienna made a decision. She would accept his help. For now, she would work hard, save her money, and repay every kindness. And when she left this place, because she would leave, would find somewhere to build a life on her own terms, she would remember that not all cowboys were cruel. But she still didn't trust men in hats. One canteen of water and a ham sandwich couldn't erase 23 years of hard-learned lessons. Trust how he treated her. Fine. She would watch and wait and see if Wade Hunter was different, or if he was just better at hiding his true nature than most. Time would tell. It always did. The days in Hollow Bluff took on a rhythm. Sienna rose with the sun, helped Martha with morning chores to earn her keep, then walked to the general store where she bent over her needle until evening. It was a quiet life, predictable in a way that soothed her rattled nerves. She sewed to keep from thinking. Every stitch was a small victory against the voices in her head, the ones that whispered she'd been a fool to believe those letters, that she'd never amount to more than a cautionary tale told in saloons, when her fingers moved across fabric, creating something useful from torn and broken things. She could almost forget the humiliation of that first day. The work came steady. Word had spread that Mrs. Garrett's new seamstress had skilled hands, and the women of Hollow Bluff brought their mending with increasing frequency. Torn hems, split seams, buttons that needed replacing. Sienna handled them all with quiet efficiency. You've got a gift, Mrs. Garrett observed one afternoon, watching Sienna repair a delicate piece of lace. Where'd you learn such fine work? My aunt, first, then Mrs. Delacroix. Sienna didn't look up from her stitching. When you've got no dowry and no prospects, you'd better have useful hands. Prospects aren't everything. I had 3 proposals before I married Mr. Garrett, and the 2 I refused are both dead now. One from drink, one from foolishness with a half-broke Mustang. The older woman straightened a bolt of calico. Sometimes what looks like misfortune is really providence in disguise. Through the window, Sienna caught sight of a familiar figure. Wade Hunter rode past, heading toward the edge of town where she'd learned he was helping build new fence lines for the Mackenzie Ranch. He sat his horse like he'd been born to it, moving with the animal rather than upon it. He builds fences without looking back, she thought, then wondered where such a notion had come from. It was true, though. She'd observed him these past 2 weeks, despite herself. He worked from dawn to dusk, steady as a clock. He came to town for supplies, spoke when spoken to, then returned to his labors. No lingering at the saloon, no crude jokes with the other cowboys, no long looks at the women who passed. You're watching him again, Mrs. Garrett said mildly. Heat crept up Sienna's neck. I'm watching the street. It's a public thoroughfare. Mm-hmm. And I suppose it's coincidence that you only watch it when Wade Hunter passes by. I don't trust him. The words came out sharper than intended. Men who seem too good usually are... Mrs. Garrett was quiet for a moment, considering. You know, I've run this store for 15 years. Seen all kinds of men come through: gamblers, drifters, soldiers, ranchers. The bad ones. They show themselves quick. Can't help it, evil loves an audience. She moved to the window, looking out at the dusty street. But Wade, 2 years he's been here, and he's never raised his voice in anger. Never missed a debt. Never taken advantage when he could have. Either he's the best actor God ever made, or he's exactly what he appears to be. Which is a man who's learned that the best way to live is quiet and honest. Mrs. Garrett turned back to her work. Not everyone's hiding secrets. Sienna, some folks are just trying to get by, same as you. That evening, Sienna found Wade's horse tied outside the boarding house. The man himself sat on the porch with Martha, his hat on his knee, listening as the older woman talked about her late husband's fruit trees. Never could get the apples to take, but the peaches did fine until the drought of 78 inches, Martha was saying. She brightened when she saw Sienna. There you are. Dear, Wade brought something for you. Sienna's steps slowed. I've told you, Mr. Hunter, I don't need... It's not charity. His voice was calm, matter of fact. It's work, if you want it. He reached into the saddlebag at his feet and pulled out a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Inside were leather work gloves, well made but showing hard use. The fingers were worn through, the palms patched and repatched. These need more than mending, he said. They need rebuilding. I'll pay fair for the work. Sienna examined the gloves, her professional eye assessing the damage. These are beyond repair. You'd do better buying new ones. Maybe. He leaned back in his chair. But these particular gloves built half the fence lines from here to Sweetwater. Seems wrong to cast them aside just because they're worn. She looked up, caught by something in his tone. They're just gloves. Nothing's just anything if it matters to someone. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. If you can't fix them, no harm done. If you can, I'll pay $2 for the work. $2 was more than fair, it was generous. New gloves cost less. But as Sienna held the worn leather, she understood this wasn't really about gloves at all. I'll see what I can do, she said quietly. Wade nodded and moved toward his horse. As he passed, she caught the scent of leather and horse and honest sweat. Working man's cologne, her aunt used to call it. Mr. Hunter, she called after him. He paused, one hand on his horse's neck. Why these gloves, really? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my father gave them to me when I was 16. First thing I ever owned that was truly mine. He swung up into the saddle. Sometimes keeping something whole matters more than starting fresh. After he left, Sienna sat on the porch examining the gloves by lamplight. They told a story in every worn spot and careful patch. Here, where the reins rubbed. There, where barbed wire had torn through. Each repair spoke of someone who valued things, who didn't discard what could be saved. You're going to fix them, Martha said. It wasn't a question. I'm going to try. Sienna traced a finger along a particularly clever patch. He's not what I expected. Good men rarely are. Martha rocked slowly in her chair. We get so used to disappointment, we forget some folks are exactly what they claim to be. That night, Sienna worked on the gloves by candlelight. She took them apart carefully, saving what leather could be salvaged. From Mrs. Garrett's scrap bin, she'd found pieces of matching hide, slowly, painstakingly. She began rebuilding them. It was like solving a puzzle, finding ways to marry old and new without losing the glove's essential character. She reinforced the fingers with hidden stitching, replaced the worn palms while keeping the original cuffs. Every stitch was tiny, precise, designed to last. As she worked, she thought about Wade's words. Sometimes keeping something whole matters more than starting fresh. Was he talking about gloves or something else? Everyone in Hollow Bluff seemed to think he was running from something. What did a man like that want to keep whole? 3 days later, she finished the gloves. They looked nearly new but retained the shape of his hands, the softness that came from years of use. She'd even managed to save most of the original stitching at the cuffs, the part his father's hands might have touched. When Wade came to collect them, his expression was worth more than the $2 silver he placed on the counter. "They're perfect," he said simply, turning them over in his hands. "They'll last another few years if you oil them regular," Sienna said, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. The right palm might need attention come winter, but the fingers should hold. He tried them on, flexing his hands. The fit was perfect. "Thank you." "It was just a job," she said, but the words felt hollow. It had been more than that, and they both knew it. Wade reached into his pocket again, but she stopped him. "You already paid." "This isn't payment." He set something on the counter, a small bottle of leather oil. "For the gloves, and—" He produced another item, wrapped in cloth. "This needs mending too, when you have time." After he left, Sienna unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a shirt, torn at the shoulder, but tucked in the fold was a piece of paper with a single line, "Good work deserves recognition." "That man, Mrs., Garrett said, shaking her head, "is either sweet on you or the most roundabout fellow God ever made." "He's just—" Sienna faltered, unsure how to finish. Just what kind thoughtful different from every cowboy who'd whistled at her on the street or made crude suggestions when they thought she couldn't hear. "He's just Wade," she said finally. "Mrs., Garrett smiled knowingly. "Yes, dear, he certainly is." That night, as Sienna worked on Wade's shirt, she found herself humming. It was an old song her mother used to sing before the cattle driver came. She stopped, surprised by the memory and by the absence of pain that usually accompanied it. Maybe it was possible to mend more than just gloves and shirts. Maybe, stitch by careful stitch, other torn things could be made whole again. But that was foolish thinking, the kind that had gotten her stranded here in the first place. She bent back to her work, pushing such thoughts aside. She had a job to do, a debt to repay, a life to rebuild. She sewed to keep from thinking, but sometimes, just sometimes, the thoughts crept in anyway. And lately, too many of them wore a worn hat and leather gloves carefully mended with hope. The pattern had become comfortable, predictable even. Every few days, Wade would appear at the general store with something that needed mending: a torn shirt, a split seam in his vest, a saddlebag with broken stitching. He never lingered, never made conversation beyond what was necessary. Just left his items with Mrs. Garrett and collected them when finished, always paying fairly. It was the glove that broke the pattern. Thursday afternoon, just as the light was starting to slant golden through the window, he came in with a single leather glove, the same one she'd rebuilt weeks ago, except now the left thumb had a small tear. Already, Sienna examined the damage, frowning. "This shouldn't have split so soon." Wade shifted his weight, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked almost embarrassed. "Might have cut it on purpose, on a nail." She looked up sharply. "You tore it intentionally." "Maybe." He met her gaze steadily. "Wanted to leave you this, but couldn't figure out how without making it seem like—" He trailed off, then reached into his pocket and placed a folded piece of paper on the counter. Before she could respond, he was gone, the bell over the door chiming his departure. Sienna unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Inside, in careful handwriting, were just a few lines. "Don't let their laughter write your story. You're more than what brought you here, more than what tried to break you." She sank onto her stool, the note clutched in her hands. It was unsigned, but she knew that handwriting now had seen it on the receipts he signed, on the list of supplies he'd once dropped. "Well, Mrs., Garrett said from the doorway, That's not subtle at all. He tore his glove on purpose just to leave me a note. Sienna's voice was barely above a whisper. Who does that? A man who knows you wouldn't accept kindness straight on. Mrs. Garrett came closer, her expression gentle. You've built walls higher than prison fences. Dear, can't blame him for finding creative ways around them. That evening, Sienna sat on Martha's porch with the glove in her lap, already mended. The repair had taken minutes. Understanding Wade's gesture might take considerably longer. You're thinking too hard, Martha observed, not looking up from her knitting. He confuses me. Sienna turned the glove over in her hands. Every other man I've known took what they wanted or said what they thought I wanted to hear. Wade just leaves notes in torn gloves. My late husband, God rest him, courted me for 2 years without saying a word about it. Martha's needles clicked rhythmically. Used to leave wildflowers on my doorstep every morning. Never said they were from him. Never asked for thanks. Just left them there like the sunrise. What made him finally speak up? Another man started leaving flowers too. Martha chuckled. Albert found his voice right quick after that. The next morning, Sienna returned the glove to the store early, hoping to avoid Wade entirely. But he was already there, leaning against the counter talking to Mrs. Garrett about seed prices. Fixed already. He took the glove, examining her work. Thank you. She wanted to mention the note, to ask why, to say something meaningful. Instead, she heard herself saying, try to keep them away from nails. Yes, ma'am. The corner of his mouth twitched the closest she'd seen him come to a smile. I'll be more careful. He started to leave, then paused at the door. Without turning around, he said, There's a barn raising at the Johnsons' place tomorrow. Most of the town will be there. Good food. Fair company. Then he was gone before she could respond. That, Mrs. Garrett announced, was an invitation. He didn't invite me. He just mentioned it. Lord, give me strength. Mrs. Garrett raised her eyes heavenward. That man has done everything but hire the town crier to announce his interest. What more do you need? What did she need? Sienna wasn't sure. All her life, men had approached her with swagger and certainty, making their intentions clear as day. Wade approached sideways, like a man gentling a spooked horse, careful not to startle. The barn raising was all anyone talked about the next day. The Johnsons were new to town, and barn raisings were social events as much as work parties. Women would bring food, men would provide labor, and children would run wild while their parents gossiped and planned. You should go, Mrs. Garrett said for the 3rd time. I'm closing the store at noon anyway. I have work to finish. That work will keep, Mrs. Garrett's tone brooked no argument. You've been here over a month, and all you do is sew and sleep. It's not natural for a young woman. So Sienna found herself walking to the Johnson property with a borrowed basket of cornbread, wearing her second-best dress, the first having been ruined by travel. The sound of hammers and saws reached her before the sight did, along with laughter and shouted instructions. The barn skeleton was already rising against the sky. Men balanced on beams like acrobats. She spotted Wade immediately, working alongside 3 other cowboys to hoist a heavy timber into place. He'd stripped down to his shirt, sleeves rolled up, the rebuilt gloves protecting his hands. Sienna, Martha waved her over to where the women had set up tables. Just in time. We need hands for serving. The next hours passed in a blur of ladling stew, slicing bread, and keeping pitchers filled. But Sienna found her eyes drawn repeatedly to the barn, to the men working in practice synchronization. Wade never looked her way, focused entirely on his task. But somehow, she knew he was aware of her presence. It was in the way he positioned himself, always in her line of sight, in the careful way he moved as if conscious of being observed. When the men broke for the noon meal, they descended on the food tables like locusts. Wade hung back, letting others go first, finally approaching when the crowd had thinned. "Miss Clay," he nodded politely, accepting the plate she offered. "Mr. Hunter." She ladled stew carefully, proud when her hands remained steady. "The barn's coming along well. Good crew makes the difference." He paused, then added quietly, "Glad you came," before she could respond. Pike, the young man who'd laughed at her that first day, pushed between them. "Well, if it ain't the mail-order bride. Surprised to see you still here. Thought you'd have run home to Mama by now." The words stung, bringing back all the humiliation she'd tried to forget. Around them, conversation stilled. "That's enough, Pike." Wade's voice was calm, but carried an edge she hadn't heard before. "Just making conversation." Pike grinned, ugly in his amusement. "No harmony. There's harm in cruel words." Wade set down his plate, squaring his shoulders, apologized to the lady. For what speaking truth she came here chasing a lie, and Wade moved so fast Sienna almost missed it. He didn't strike Pike, didn't raise a hand. He simply stepped forward, using his height and presence to back the younger man up. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for Pike's ears. But Sienna caught the words. "Every man here has believed a lie at some point. Difference is, she had the courage to face hers. You mock what you're too cowardly to understand." Pike's face flushed red. For a moment, violence trembled in the air. Then he muttered something that might have been an apology and stalked away. Wade turned back to Sienna, his expression carefully neutral. "I apologize for that. Some folks never learn proper manners." "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." He picked up his plate again. "Nobody should be mocked for having hope." He moved away to eat with the other men, leaving Sienna staring after him. Around her, the women exchanged knowing looks. "That Pike's been needing a talking to for months," one said. "Wade Hunter doesn't usually involve himself in disputes," added another. "Must have had good reason." The reason was standing right there, hands trembling as she served the next person in line. Wade had defended her, publicly and without hesitation, not with violence or bravado, but with quiet strength that was somehow more effective. The afternoon wore on, the barn taking shape board by board. Sienna helped clear tables and wash dishes, all the while aware of Wade's presence like a constant pulse. When the sun began to sink, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the barn stood complete. As people began to drift home, Sienna looked for Wade to thank him. She found him by the water barrels, washing sawdust from his hands and face. "Mr. Hunter." He turned, water dripping from his jaw. "Miss Clay, I wanted to thank you for earlier with Pike." He dried his hands on his shirt. "No thanks needed. Wrong is wrong, no matter who speaks it." "Still," she twisted her hands together, searching for words. "Your note, the other day, did you mean it?" "Every word." The simple certainty in his voice made her breath catch. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Wade was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the new barn glowing in the sunset. "You know what I see when I look at you?" She shook her head. "Someone who got knocked down and got back up. Someone who could have sat in that street feeling sorry for herself, could have taken the easy path Ruby offered, could have given up." He turned to face her fully. "Instead, you work honest, help Martha with her chores, and treat everyone with dignity even when they don't deserve it. That's rare. Miss Clay, worth protecting." Sienna felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm nobody special." "I disagree." He gathered his tools, preparing to leave. "But I'm not asking you to believe me. Just asking you not to believe the Pikes of the world either." He touched his hat brim and walked away, leaving her standing by the water barrels with her heart doing strange things in her chest. That night, she carefully pressed the note between the pages of her Bible. "Don't let their laughter write your story." Such simple words, But they'd given her something she hadn't realized. She'd lost the possibility that she could be more than her mistakes. Wade Hunter, with his torn gloves and sideways kindness, was slowly teaching her to believe in herself again. She wasn't sure if that made him dangerous or wonderful. Perhaps both. Gossip travels faster than dust in a town like Hollow Bluff. And by Sunday morning, everyone seemed to have an opinion about what happened at the barn raising. Sienna felt the weight of their stares as she walked to church with Martha. Whispers followed in her wake, some sympathetic, others less so. She kept her chin high, her mother's voice echoing in her memory. "Never let them see you bend, baby girl. Pay them no mind," Martha murmured, linking their arms. "Half of them have done worse than believe a false advertisement, and the other half wish they had the courage to try." The small church was already filling when they arrived. Sienna had attended services sporadically since arriving, sitting in the back row where she could slip out easily if needed. Today felt different, charged somehow, as if the very air held expectations. She spotted Wade immediately, sitting where he always did, third row from the back, on the aisle. He rarely attended. Mrs. Garrett had mentioned, which made his presence notable. He didn't turn when they entered, but she saw his shoulders tense slightly, aware. Martha led them to a pew in the middle, more prominent than Sienna would have chosen. As they settled, she heard Pike's distinctive laugh from somewhere behind them. "Heard Hunter's been playing protector," a woman's voice carried clearly. "Wonder what he expects in return." "Hush, Gladys," another voice chided. "Not everyone thinks like your late husband." The first hymn saved Sienna from hearing more. She focused on the familiar words, letting them wash over her like a shield. Beside her, Martha sang in her wavering soprano, patting Sienna's hand occasionally. Reverend Douglas preached about compassion and judgment. His words pointed enough that several congregants shifted uncomfortably. Sienna kept her eyes forward, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her affected. After the service, the congregation spilled out into the churchyard for the social hour. Sienna tried to slip away, but Martha held her firmly. Running never solved anything. The older woman said, "Face them with grace." So Sienna stood beside the refreshment table, serving lemonade with hands that only trembled slightly. Most people were polite enough, offering bland pleasantries. A few, like Mrs. Johnson from the barn raising, were genuinely warm. "Don't mind the busybodies," Mrs. Johnson said quietly. "Half of them came here with secrets of their own. They just forget when it suits them." It was then that Councilman Edward Bright approached. Sienna had noticed him before, hard to miss when he owned the largest house in town and never let anyone forget it. He was perhaps 40, with silver threading through his hair and clothes that spoke of money. "Miss Clay." He tipped his hat, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "I've heard excellent things about your needlework." "Thank you, Mr. Bright. Please, call me Edward." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I wonder if we might speak privately. I have a business proposition that might interest you." Before Sienna could respond, Wade materialized at her elbow. He didn't touch her, didn't presume, but his presence was solid and unmistakable. "Miss Clay promised to look at some hymnal repairs for Reverend Douglas," he said calmly. "If you'll excuse us." It was a lie, smooth and believable. Councilman Bright's eyes narrowed, flicking between them. "Of course. Another time, perhaps." He inclined his head and moved away, but not before Sienna caught the calculating look he threw Wade's way. "I didn't promise," she began. "You didn't need to hear what he had to say," Wade interrupted quietly. "Trust me on that." They walked toward the church, away from curious ears. When they were relatively alone, Sienna turned to face him. "I can handle myself. Mr. Hunter." "I know you can." He looked out over the prairie beyond the churchyard. "But Bright collects things, pretty things, useful things. Once he decides he wants something, he doesn't stop until he owns it. I'm not a thing to be collected. No, you're not, but he doesn't see it that way. Wade finally met her eyes. He's done this before. Offers help, seems generous. Then the price comes due, and it's always higher than you'd think. Sienna studied his face, seeing something she hadn't noticed before, a protective anger carefully controlled. Speaking from experience. Not mine, but I've been here long enough to see his patterns. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. Just be careful. Please. The please did something to her heart she wasn't ready to examine. Why do you care so much? Someone should. He said it simply, as if it were obvious. You deserve people in your corner who don't want anything from you. And you don't. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was soft. Only thing I want is to see you stop believing everyone's out to hurt you, but that's not mine to take. That's yours to give. If and when you're ready. He touched his hat brim and started to walk away, but Sienna found herself calling after him, Wade. He turned, and she realized it was the first time she'd used his given name. Thank you for the intervention. A real smile crossed his face then, transforming it. Anytime, Sienna. The next few days passed in a haze of speculation. The encounter between Wade and Councilman Bright had been witnessed by enough people that versions of it spread like wildfire. Some said Wade was staking his claim. Others suggested he was overstepping, interfering where he had no right. Sienna tried to ignore it all, focusing on her work. But Wednesday afternoon, Councilman Bright appeared at the general store. Miss Clay. He removed his hat. All politeness. I apologize if my approach on Sunday was unwelcome. I simply wanted to offer you an opportunity. Mrs. Garrett watched from behind the counter, her expression carefully neutral. What kind of opportunity? Sienna asked warily. I own several properties in town, including the empty storefront next to the bank. I believe it would make an excellent dress shop. He smiled, showing too many teeth. You're far too talented to be doing piecework in a back room. That's generous, Mr. Bright. But I couldn't afford. We could work out very reasonable terms, perhaps even a partnership of sorts. Your talent, my backing. You could be quite successful. It was a golden opportunity, the kind that could establish her properly in town. So why did it feel like a trap? I'd need to think about it, she said carefully. Of course. Take all the time you need. He produced a calling card. When you're ready to discuss details, please call on me. My housekeeper serves tea at 3. After he left, Mrs. Garrett snorted. Tea at 3, as if you're some society lady he's courting. It's a business proposition, Sienna said, but the words felt hollow. Is it, Mrs. Garrett came around the counter. Girl, I've known Edward Bright for 10 years. He doesn't do anything without benefit to himself. Question is, what benefit does he see in you? That night, Sienna sat on Martha's porch, turning Bright's card over in her hands. A dress shop of her own. Independence. Security. Everything she'd dreamed of. Deep thoughts, Martha asked. Sienna told her about the offer. Martha listened without interrupting, her knitting needles clicking steadily. Sounds too good to be true, the older woman finally said. That's what I'm afraid of. Then listen to that fear. It's kept you safe this far. Martha paused in her knitting. You know, Wade Hunter came by earlier. Sienna's heart jumped. Oh. Mentioned he saw Bright at the store. Wanted to make sure you were all right. He worries too much. Does he? Martha resumed her knitting. Seems to me a woman could do worse than having Wade Hunter in her corner. Man doesn't offer his concern lightly. Late that night, unable to sleep, Sienna walked to the edge of town where she could see the stars properly. The vast Texas sky stretched endlessly, making her feel small but somehow not alone. Can't sleep. She didn't startle at Wade's voice. Somehow, She'd expected him. Too much thinking, she admitted. He came to stand beside her, maintaining proper distance but close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cool night air. Bright make his offer. A dress shop, partnership, everything I thought I wanted. But, she turned to look at him. In the starlight, his face was all planes and shadows. But I've learned to distrust things that look too perfect. Smart woman. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Finally, Wade spoke again. You asked why I care. Truth is, I see something of myself in you. Coming to a place with nothing but hope, having it crushed, then finding a way to build something anyway. What crushed your hope? Story for another time. He shifted slightly. Point is, you're doing fine as you are. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Not Bright, not Pike, not even me. You're different from them. Am I? He turned to face her fully. I show up with torn clothes, leave notes, make sure you're fed and safe. How do you know I'm not working some long game? The question should have alarmed her. Instead, she found herself stepping closer. Because a man playing a long game doesn't point out that he might be playing one. He huffed what might have been a laugh. Fair point. Besides, she added, you had chance enough to press your advantage. That first day, when I was desperate. Since then, when I've been grateful. You haven't. Wouldn't be right. No, she agreed. It wouldn't, and that's how I know you're different. They stood there a moment longer, something shifting in the air between them. Then Wade stepped back, breaking the spell. You should get some rest. And, Sienna, whatever you decide about Bright's offer, make sure it's your choice. Not because you're scared, not because you're desperate. Your choice. As he walked away, Sienna realized the gossips were right about one thing: something was building between her and Wade Hunter. But it wasn't what they thought. It was stranger and stronger than mere attraction. It was trust, growing as slow and steady as spring grass after a hard winter. And that terrified her more than all of Councilman Bright's offers combined. The church social after Sunday service had become a minefield of whispers and glances. Sienna stood near the punch bowl, her spine straight despite the weight of curious stares. 3 days had passed since her midnight conversation with Wade, and she still hadn't given Councilman Bright an answer about his offer. She thinks she's too good for us now, someone murmured, not quite quietly enough. Hunter's been filling her head with notions. Sienna's hand tightened on the ladle, but she kept her expression pleasant. She'd learned long ago that showing hurt only fed the gossip's fire. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, making her wish for the cool dimness of the general store. She'd worn her best dress, the green calico she'd made herself from Mrs. Garrett's fabric remnants, but now felt overdressed among the other women's simple cotton. Miss Clay. She turned to find Reverend Douglas's wife, a gentlewoman whose kind eyes held genuine warmth. Mrs. Douglas. I wanted to thank you again for mending the altar cloths. Your embroidery work is exceptional. It was my pleasure. Sienna served her a cup of punch, grateful for the friendly face. I wonder, Mrs. Douglas continued, if you might consider teaching some of the young ladies. We've been wanting to start a sewing circle, but I'm afraid my own skills are rather basic. Before Sienna could respond, a commotion arose near the church steps. The crowd parted, revealing Wade Hunter in what was clearly his Sunday best, a clean black vest over a white shirt, his usually unruly hair combed neat. He rarely attended church, and when he did, he never stayed for the social. Yet here he was, hat in hand, walking directly toward her with the focused intent of a man on a mission. The whispers intensified. Miss Clay, he said when he reached her, his voice carrying clearly, might I have a word? Of course. He glanced at Mrs. Douglas, touching his hat brim politely, then returned his attention to Sienna. I was wondering if you might honor me with a dance at the social next Saturday. The punch ladle slipped from Sienna's suddenly nerveless fingers. Around them, conversation stopped entirely. There was no social plan for next Saturday. Everyone knew that, which meant Wade was inventing one, right here in front of the entire congregation. She searched his face, finding only calm determination. I wasn't aware there was a social next Saturday. There is now, Martha Boone announced, appearing at Wade's elbow with suspicious timing. Been meaning to organize one before the harvest gets too busy. Music, dancing, proper festivities. Well then, Mrs. Douglas chimed in, her eyes twinkling. How wonderful, it's been ages since we had a real dance. Wade hadn't looked away from Sienna. So, will you dance with me? She understood suddenly what he was doing. This wasn't just an invitation, it was a public declaration. He was telling the town, telling Councilman Bright, telling everyone who whispered behind their hands, that Sienna Clay was under his protection. Not as property, not as conquest, but as someone worthy of proper courtship. One dance, she heard herself say. Just one, if you trust me. Something flickered in his eyes, surprised that she'd remembered his words from the barn raising. Perhaps. I trust you, Miss Clay. He put his hat back on and walked away, leaving Sienna standing in a circle of stunned faces. Well, Martha said with immense satisfaction. I'd better start planning. A social doesn't organize itself. She bustled off, already recruiting helpers. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. People approached Sienna with new interest, some friendly, others calculating. She endured it all with as much grace as she could muster, but inside her thoughts churned. What had Wade done, and more importantly, why? She found her answer that evening when he appeared at Martha's gate with a bundle of wildflowers, prairie roses, and black-eyed Susans tied with string. Figured if I'm going to court you proper, might as well start right, he said, offering them with endearing awkwardness. Wade. She accepted the flowers, their sweet scent rising between them. You don't have to do this. Whatever game Councilman Bright is playing, this isn't about Bright. He leaned against the gatepost, finally showing signs of the nervousness he'd hidden at church. Maybe it started that way, wanting to protect you from him, but standing there today, asking you to dance. That was just me. Just you. Just a man asking a woman he admires to dance with him. He met her eyes steadily. Nothing more complicated than that, unless you want it to be. Sienna studied the flowers, using them to hide her confusion. I don't understand you. What's to understand? I work hard, pay my debts, and treat people fair. When I see something worth protecting, I protect it. When I see someone worth knowing, I try to know them. He straightened. I'm not asking for promises. Sienna, just a dance. The whole town will talk. Let them. They talk anyway. He touched his hat. Evening, Miss Clay. After he left, Sienna sat on the porch steps, flowers in her lap, trying to make sense of the day. Martha found her there an hour later. That man, the older woman said, settling beside her with a grunt. Just put a target on his back for you. What do you mean? Edward Bright doesn't like being thwarted. By publicly courting you, Wade's made it clear you're not available for Bright's schemes. Martha patted her knee. Question is, what are you going to do about it? The week passed in a whirlwind of preparation. True to her word, Martha organized the social with military precision. Musicians were hired, food was planned, and the town hall was cleaned within an inch of its life. Wade kept his distance during the week, but his presence was felt in small ways. A repaired board on Martha's porch, fresh water barrels appearing at the general store, his horse tied outside the sheriff's office when Councilman Bright made his daily rounds. He's standing guard, Mrs., Garrett observed, making sure Bright knows you're not alone. Friday evening, as Sienna finished the last of her mending, a package appeared on the store counter. Inside was fabric soft blue cotton sprigged with tiny white flowers. For your dance dress, the note read. If you want it. Oh my, Mrs. Garrett breathed. That's quality goods. Must have cost a week's wages. Sienna ran her fingers over the fabric, emotion thick in her throat. She'd been planning to wear her green calico again, trying not to care that it was mended and faded. Wade had noticed, had cared enough to give her the choice of something new. She worked through the night, cutting and sewing by lamplight. The dress came together like a dream-fitted bodice, full skirt, little cap sleeves that showed her arms. It was modest but lovely, the nicest thing she'd owned in years. Saturday arrived with clear skies and nervous energy. The entire town seemed caught up in anticipation. Even those who'd whispered unkindly about Sienna appeared eager to witness whatever would unfold. She dressed carefully, Martha helping with the buttons and hairpins. Looking in the mirror, Sienna hardly recognized herself. The blue brought out her eyes. The fit showed her figure without being improper. She looked like someone worth dancing with. Beautiful, Martha pronounced. That cowboy won't know what hit him. The town hall was already crowded when they arrived. Lanterns cast warm light over couples milling about, children darting between legs, older folks claiming chairs along the walls. The musicians were tuning up, the sound both festive and slightly ominous. Sienna spotted Wade immediately. He stood near the refreshment table, surrounded by other ranchers, but not really part of their conversation. He'd dressed carefully black pants, clean white shirt, string tie. His boots were polished, his hair still slightly damp from washing. When he saw her, his expression shifted into something she'd never seen before, a mixture of awe and determination that made her heart skip. He crossed to her without hesitation, the crowd parting before him. Miss Clay, he said formally, but his eyes said her given name. You look... He stopped, apparently at a loss. Thank you for the fabric, she said softly. It's beautiful. Not half as beautiful as what you did with it. He offered his hand. Still willing to risk that dance? The musicians struck up a waltz. Around them, other couples moved onto the floor, but Sienna was only aware of Wade's steady presence, his hand warm and calloused in hers. I should warn you, she said as he led her out. I learned to dance in a mining camp. It might not be proper. Nothing about us has been proper so far, he replied, settling his hand carefully at her waist. Why start now? They moved together tentatively at first, finding their rhythm. Wade danced like he did everything else competently, without flash, but with complete focus on the task at hand. He held her like she was precious, but not fragile, leading with gentle confidence. People are staring, she murmured. Let them. He spun her carefully, bringing her back close. You all right? Yes, and surprisingly, she was. Here in his arms, with his solid presence between her and the watching world, she felt safer than she had in months. Wade. Thank you for all of it. The flowers, the fabric, this ridiculous public display. Nothing ridiculous about it. He met her eyes. Man's allowed to dance with a woman he admires, even if she doesn't trust cowboys. I'm starting to think, she said slowly, that maybe I've been wrong about that, at least about one cowboy. His hand tightened slightly on hers. That's so. Don't let it go to your head. Wouldn't dream of it. But he was almost smiling, and it transformed his usually serious face into something younger, lighter. The dance ended too soon. As Wade escorted her off the floor, Sienna caught sight of Councilman Bright near the door, his expression dark with displeasure. The sight should have worried her. Instead, she found herself moving closer to Wade, claiming his protection without words. One dance, you said, he reminded her as new music started. I did. She looked up at him, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. But I didn't say anything about the second one. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Sienna Clay, are you asking me to dance? If you trust me, she said, echoing their words from earlier. This time, when he took her in his arms, it felt like coming home. They danced 3 more times that night, scandal be damned. And when Wade walked her back to Martha's under the stars, Sienna realized something had shifted fundamentally. She wasn't just accepting his protection anymore. She was choosing it. Choosing him. Choosing the possibility that not all cowboys were cruel after all. At the gate, Wade paused. "Sienna." "Yes." "I meant what I said. I'm not asking for promises, but I'd like to keep calling on you, if you're willing." She thought of her mother, of every man who'd disappointed her, of all the reasons she should say no. Then she thought of torn gloves and quiet kindness and a man who'd stood between her and humiliation without being asked. "I'm willing," she said softly. "But Wade, I'm still scared." "I know." He touched her cheek gently. The first time he'd presumed such intimacy. "That's all right. We'll go slow as you need." As she watched him walk away, Sienna touched the spot where his fingers had been. She was still scared. Yes, but for the first time in her life, she was beginning to think the risk might be worth it. The first wisps of smoke appeared on the horizon just after noon on Tuesday. Thin gray fingers reaching into the cloudless sky. Sienna noticed them through the general store window as she worked on a particularly delicate piece of lacework. "Fire. Misses," Garrett said grimly, coming to stand beside her. "Ridge Trail by the look of it." Sienna's needle stilled. Ridge Trail was where Wade rode herd with the other cowboys from the Mackenzie Ranch, where he'd been since dawn, moving cattle to fresh grazing. Within minutes, the alarm bell at the church began to toll 3 rings. Pause. 3 rings again. The signal for wildfire. Men poured out of buildings, heading for horses and water barrels. Women gathered children, preparing for the possibility of evacuation if the wind shifted wrong. Those fires move fast in this dry spell. "Mrs." Garrett muttered, already pulling important papers from her desk. "Lost 2 homesteads to one back in '81. Sienna set aside her sewing, her hands trembling. Through the window, she could see the smoke growing thicker, darker, somewhere in that haze. Wade was working. Was he safe? Had he seen the danger in time? "I need to help," she said suddenly. "Help? How you going to throw your thimble at the flames, Mrs.?" Garrett's tone was sharp, but not unkind. "Women's work in a fire is to prepare for the injured. Get to Martha's, she'll be organizing medical supplies." Sienna ran through the streets, her blue work dress catching on her legs. The town had erupted into controlled chaos, men loading wagons with barrels and wet blankets, horses being saddled in haste. She passed Councilman Bright directing operations from his porch, his face grave. Martha's boarding house had transformed into a makeshift medical station. Women rolled bandages, prepared poultices, and cleared beds for potential injured. Martha herself stood in the middle of it all, calm as a general. "Sienna, good. Can you tear these sheets into strips? We'll need plenty of bandages." Sienna worked mechanically, tearing fabric while her mind stayed fixed on that growing column of smoke. Other women spoke in hushed tones around her. "Saw Tom Mackenzie ride out with the first group. Winds picking up from the south. If it jumps the creek, heaven help us all." The afternoon crawled by in agonizing increments. More men rode out. The smoke spread across the sky like spilled ink. Reports trickled back the fire had started near Devil's Canyon, was moving fast through the dry grass. The cattle had scattered. Men were trying to create fire breaks. "No word on injuries yet. Doctor," Morrison announced when he stopped by to collect supplies. "But with this many men fighting, there will be..." Sienna moved to the porch, unable to stay inside any longer. Other women had gathered there, watching the road for returning riders. The air smelled of smoke now, acrid and threatening. "You're cowboys out there," said a voice beside her. "Mrs." Johnson from the barn raising had joined her, face creased with worry. "My Robert, too. They know what they're doing. These men, been fighting prairie fires since they could ride." But knowing and surviving were different things. Sienna had heard the stories men caught in shifting winds, overcome by smoke, trampled by panicked cattle. The prairie could kill in a dozen ways, and fire was among the cruelest. Sunset came in shades of orange and red, the natural beauty made sinister by the smoke. The first riders appeared as shadows against the dying light, exhausted men on lathered horses, faces black with soot. Sienna searched each group desperately. Not Wade. Not yet. 3 burned at the Crooked Creek line, someone shouted. Bringing them in now. The women sprang into action. Sienna helped prepare beds, heated water, did whatever Martha directed. The injured arrived 2 cowboys with burned hands, another overcome by smoke. All from the Mackenzie outfit. All had stories. Fire jumped the creek like it wasn't there. One gasped as Sienna wrapped his blistered hands. Wade Hunter saved Jed's life, pulled him clear when his horse went down. Where is Wade? The question escaped before she could stop it. Last I saw, he was helping Tom push the remuda to safety. That was hours ago, near the North Ridge. More riders came, more injured. Still no Wade. Full darkness fell, lit by an ugly glow on the horizon. The fire was contained. Someone reported, but still burning. Most of the men were accounted for. Most. Sienna couldn't stay still. She paced the porch, helped where she could, paced again. Martha finally pressed a cup of coffee into her hands. Wearing a groove in my floorboards won't bring him back faster. The older woman said gently, I can't just sit here. Yes, you can. It's what we do. We wait, we pray, and we patch them up when they come home. Martha squeezed her shoulder. He'll come back, child. That man's got too much to live for now. It was near midnight when the last group of riders appeared. Sienna saw them from the porch, dark shapes moving slowly, exhaustion in every line. She was down the steps before she thought, searching faces in the lamplight. There, 3rd horse from the left. Wade slumped in the saddle, barely upright, but alive, blessedly, wonderfully alive. She reached him as he half fell from his horse. His clothes were singed, his face black with soot except where sweat had carved channels. A nasty burn marked his left forearm, and he favored his right leg. Sienna. His voice was hoarse from smoke. What are you doing out here? Waiting for you, you fool. She got under his good arm, supporting him. Can you walk? I'm fine. You're not fine. You can barely stand. Had worse. But he leaned on her heavily as they made their way to the boarding house. Inside, Martha took charge. Burns and smoke inhalation by the look of it. Maybe that ankle too. Get him to the back room. Sienna, I'll bring supplies. Sienna helped Wade to a cot, then watched anxiously as Martha examined him. The burn on his arm was painful but not serious. His ankle was sprained, not broken. The smoke damage would heal with rest. You're lucky, Martha pronounced. Could have been much worse. Didn't feel lucky when that wall of fire came at us, Wade muttered. He looked at Sienna. You been here all night? Where else would I be? Something shifted in his soot-covered face. Worried about me? Of course I worried. Half the prairie was on fire and you were in the middle of it. I'm not used to anyone worrying. He said it simply, like stating the weather. Feels strange. Martha finished wrapping his ankle and left them with instructions to keep the burns clean. Sienna sat on the edge of the cot, suddenly aware they were alone. The others said you saved Jed Parker, she said quietly. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't. She studied his face, seeing past the soot to the exhaustion beneath. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. He caught her hand with his good one. I'm here, a little singed maybe, but here. I was so scared. The admission came out barely above a whisper. When I saw that smoke, when you didn't come back with the others, I've never been that scared. Hey. He tugged gently on her hand, drawing her attention. I told you we'd go slow as you need. That includes not dying in prairie fires. Despite everything, she found herself almost laughing. That's not funny. Little bit funny. He winced as he shifted. Worth it to see you smile. I haven't smiled. You're thinking about it? She was, Lord help her, with him lying there injured and exhausted. She was fighting a smile. You're impossible. So I've been told. His thumb moved across her knuckles, soft as butterfly wings. Thank you for worrying. Been a long time since anyone did that for me. Get used to it, she heard herself say. Apparently, it's what I do now. His eyes went wide, then soft. That's so. Don't let it go to your head. Wouldn't dream of it. But he was smiling now. That rare, full smile that transformed his face. Sienna. Yes, might be the smoke talking, but you're the prettiest thing I've seen all day. That's definitely the smoke talking. You can barely see through all that soot. Can see what matters. His hand tightened on hers. Will you stay? Just until I fall asleep, everything feels steadier when you're here. She should refuse. It wasn't proper, sitting with him in the dark. But propriety had never done her any favors. And this man had ridden through fire and come back to her. I'll stay. Wade closed his eyes, keeping hold of her hand. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into sleep. Sienna sat watching him, memorizing the planes of his face, the way his hair fell across his forehead. She'd been so careful with her heart, building walls so high and thick she'd thought nothing could breach them. But somehow this quiet cowboy had found a way through. Not by force or pretty words, but by simply being himself, by showing up with torn gloves and gentle persistence. Martha appeared in the doorway with a blanket. You'll need this if you're staying. Am I that obvious? Child, you've been obvious since the day he stood up for you in the street. Martha draped the blanket around Sienna's shoulders. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Sienna looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and work-worn, hers smaller but no less marked by life's hardships. I think I'm going to stop being afraid. About time, Martha said softly, and left them to the quiet darkness. Sienna settled back in her chair, Wade's hand warm in hers. Outside, the smoke was clearing, stars beginning to peek through. The fire was over. They had survived. And maybe, just maybe, something new could grow from the ashes. 4 nights Sienna sat by Wade's bedside. 4 nights of changing bandages, spooning broth between his cracked lips, and watching fever dreams chase across his face. The smoke damage had been worse than Martha initially thought, settling deep in his lungs and bringing on a rattling cough that shook his whole frame. Doctor! Morrison came twice daily, his face grave. Keep him still, keep him hydrated. The next day or two will tell. Sienna barely left the room. She dozed in the chair, woke to check his breathing, cooled his fever with damp cloths. Martha brought meals she barely touched, misses. Garrett sent word that her job would wait. The world narrowed to this small space, this wounded man, this vigil. On the second night, Wade's fever spiked. He tossed restlessly, muttering words she couldn't catch. Sometimes he called for his father. Once, heartbreakingly, for someone named Samuel. Shh, she whispered, bathing his burning forehead. You're safe. Rest now. His hand caught hers, grip surprisingly strong. Don't go, he rasped, still lost in whatever memory held him. Please don't go. I'm here, she squeezed back. I'm not going anywhere. The third night was the worst. His breathing grew labored, each breath a struggle. Doctor, Morrison prepared them for the possibility that Wade might not recover. His lungs took too much damage, the doctor said quietly. Sometimes the body just can't heal fast enough. Sienna refused to accept it. She'd lost too much in her life, her mother, her home, her trust in humanity. She would not lose Wade Hunter too, not when she'd just begun to understand what he meant to her. She talked to him through the dark hours, telling him things she'd never said aloud. about her childhood in Missouri, her mother's garden before the cattle driver came, about learning to sew from her stern aunt, who showed love through teaching useful skills, about the dreams she'd carried west, foolish as they'd been. "You were right," she whispered near dawn. "Sometimes keeping something whole matters more than starting fresh. So you need to stay whole. Wade, you need to come back." On the fourth morning, the fever broke. Wade's breathing eased, the terrible rattling sound fading. When he finally opened his eyes, they were clear and focused. "Still here." His voice was barely a whisper, but there was wonder in it. "I told you I would be." He studied her face, taking in the shadows under her eyes, the wrinkled dress, the hair escaping from its pins. "You look terrible." "You're one to talk." But she was smiling through sudden tears. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "I'll try." He shifted, wincing. "How long?" "4 days. You've had the whole town worried." "Not the whole town, just you." It wasn't a question. "You stayed the whole time?" She nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Someone had to make sure you didn't die on us." "Sienna." He waited until she met his eyes. "Thank you." The weight he put on those 2 words made her throat tight. She busied herself straightening his blankets, needing something to do with her hands. "You should rest, Doctor. Morrison says." "I've been resting for 4 days." He caught her hand, stilling her nervous movements. "Talk to me instead. Tell me something true." "Like what?" "Like why you stayed, really." She sank back into her chair, their hands still joined. Outside, she could hear the town waking up horses and wagons, voices calling greetings, normal life continuing while her world had shifted on its axis. "My mother left when I was 6, she said finally. "Just walked out the door one morning and never came back. I waited by the window for 3 days, certain she'd return. My aunt had to physically carry me away." Wade's thumb moved gently across her knuckles, encouraging without pushing. "After that, I learned not to wait for anyone. People leave, it's what they do. Better to be the one who leaves first." She looked at their joined hands. "But when you didn't come back that night, when I realized I'd been waiting for you without meaning to, and I couldn't bear the thought of you leaving before I told you." "Told me what?" She met his eyes, finding courage in their steady gray depths. "That you were right. I've been letting fear write my story for too long, and I'm tired of it." Something shifted in his expression, a softness she'd only glimpsed before. "What do you want your story to say instead?" "I don't know yet, but I think—" She took a breath. "I think I want you in it. If you're willing." "Sienna Clay." His voice was rough with more than smoke damage. "I've been willing since the day you stood in that street with your chin up and your heart broken but not beaten. Just been waiting for you to see it too." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to their joined hands. "I'm still scared." "I know, but maybe we can be scared together. Seems less frightening that way." A knock at the door interrupted whatever she might have said. Martha entered with Dr. Morrison, both looking pleased to find Wade awake and coherent. "Well now," the doctor said, checking Wade's pulse and breathing. "Much improved. You gave us quite a scare, young man." "So I hear." Wade's eyes found Sienna's over the doctor's shoulder. "I had good reason to come back." The examination confirmed what they could all see: the crisis had passed. Wade would need time to fully heal. His lungs might always carry some weakness, but he would recover. "You can thank this young lady, Doctor," Morrison said, packing his bag. "Her constant care made the difference. Not many would have shown such dedication." After the doctor left, Martha fixed Sienna with a knowing look. "You need rest, child, and a bath, and a proper meal. Wade's out of danger now." "I can stay." "No." Wade squeezed her hand. "Martha's right. Go take care of yourself. I'll still be here when you get back." "Promise." "I ain't those men. Sienna." He echoed his words from days ago. but with a new weight. When I make a promise, I keep it. She stood reluctantly, swaying slightly as exhaustion hit. 4 nights of vigilance had taken their toll. I'll come back this afternoon. I'll be waiting. He caught her hand one more time. Sienna, what you said about wanting me in your story, the feeling's mutual. She carried those words with her as she finally left the sick room. The morning sun seemed impossibly bright after days in dim lamplight. The world felt new, sharp-edged with possibility. At Martha's insistence, she bathed and ate and slept for several hours. When she woke, she found half the town had sent inquiries about Wade's condition. News of his recovery had spread quickly, as had word of her devoted nursing. "You've set tongues wagging again, Mrs.?" Garrett said when Sienna stopped by the store for fresh clothes. "Though this time it's more admiration than gossip. Not many women would have done what you did. He would have done the same for me." "Yes, Mrs." Garrett agreed. "He would have. And that's the difference between Wade Hunter and most men in this town. He gives without keeping score." That afternoon, Sienna returned to find Wade sitting up, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. The change was remarkable, though still pale and thin. He looked more like himself. "Better?" she asked from the doorway. "Much." He patted the edge of the bed. "Come sit. Tell me what I missed while I was fighting ghosts." She settled carefully beside him, maintaining proper distance. "Let's see, Mrs. Johnson had her baby a girl. The Garretts received a new shipment of fabric. Oh, and apparently Councilman Bright has been telling everyone he personally organized the firefighting efforts." Wade snorted. "Sounds about right. Man never met a glory he couldn't steal." They talked quietly as the afternoon wore on. Careful subjects at First Town News, recovery plans, the damage to the Mackenzie Ranch, but gradually, inevitably, the conversation turned deeper. "Who's Samuel?" Sienna asked during a lull. "You called for him during the fever." Wade's face closed slightly. "My brother, younger by 2 years." "I didn't know you had a brother." "Had." The word carried weight. "Lost him in a river crossing 5 years back. Current took him before anyone could help." "I'm sorry." "It's why I came west. Too many memories in Kansas." He looked out the window. "Promised him I'd make something of myself out here. Some days I wonder if I've kept that promise." "You have," Sienna said firmly. "You're a good man. Wade Hunter, Samuel would be proud." He turned to look at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "You really believe that?" "I know it." She covered his hand with hers. "The same way I know you'll keep your promise to me. The same way I know I was meant to be here, in this room, having this conversation. Maybe my foolish journey wasn't so foolish after all." "How do you figure?" "Because it brought me to you." The words came easier than expected. "And despite everything, the lies, the humiliation, the fear, I can't regret that." Wade turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. "No regrets. No regrets." They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sun. Outside, life continued its noisy rhythm, but inside this quiet room, something new and precious took root trust, growing stronger with each shared breath. When Martha came to check on them later, she found them just like that, 2 people who'd found their way to each other through fire and fear, finally allowing themselves to hope. "About time," she murmured, and quietly closed the door. 2 weeks had passed since the fire, and Wade was finally back on his feet, though Martha still fussed whenever he lifted anything heavier than a coffee cup. Sienna had returned to her work at the general store, but something fundamental had changed between them, an understanding that went beyond words, born from those dark nights of uncertainty. It was a Thursday afternoon when Councilman Edward Bright entered the store, his presence filling the space like smoke. Sienna looked up from her sewing, immediately wary. Miss Clay. He removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. I trust you're well. Quite well, Mr. Bright. I heard about your devoted nursing of Mr. Hunter. Very admirable. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Though I confess surprise that you've dismissed my offer without even the courtesy of a response. Sienna set down her needle carefully. I apologize for the delay. Recent events have been distracting, but my answer is no. Thank you. I'm content with my current position. Content? He said the word like it tasted sour. A woman of your talents, content to mend torn shirts in a back room. Honest work has its own rewards. Bright moved closer, and Sienna fought the urge to step back. There was something predatory in his movements, refined but unmistakably threatening. I've been patient, Miss Clay. More patient than most would be, but that patience is wearing thin. He lowered his voice. You're new here, so perhaps you don't understand how things work. When I make an offer, it's generally accepted with gratitude. Then I'm afraid I must disappoint you. His face darkened. Disappointment can have consequences. Your position here, for instance. One word from me to Mrs. Garrett about your questionable past, your reason for coming to town. You mean the false advertisement? Sienna lifted her chin. Everyone already knows about that. Do they know about the debts you left in Missouri, the millinery shop that dismissed you under suspicious circumstances? He smiled coldly at her shocked expression. I make it my business to know things. Miss Clay, information is currency in a small town. Sienna's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. There were no suspicious circumstances. Mr. Hartley's daughter married and wanted my position. That's all. But who will believe that when I suggest otherwise, a few well-placed words, some speculation about missing inventory? He leaned against the counter. Of course, as my business partner, you'd be above such gossip. Protected, respected. I said no, and I'm giving you a chance to reconsider. He straightened his vest. I own half the buildings on this street. Miss Clay, including this one. It would be a shame if Mrs. Garrett's rent suddenly increased beyond her means. The bell over the door chimed. Wade entered, moving carefully but steadily. His eyes took in the scene bright too close. Sienna pale but defiant. Councilman, he said mildly. Didn't expect to find you here. Just concluding some business with Miss Clay. Bright's smile was sharp. Nothing that concerns you. Hunter. Funny thing about that. Wade moved to stand beside Sienna, not touching but unmistakably present. Seems like anything concerning Miss Clay concerns me too. Does it now, and what claim do you have exactly? I don't see a ring on her finger. Don't need a ring to recognize wrong when I see it. Wade's voice remained calm, but Sienna could see the tension in his shoulders. And a man using his position to pressure a woman that's about as wrong as it gets. Bright's face flushed. You forget yourself. Hunter, I could make life very difficult for you. That ranch job you're so proud of gone. That credit line at the bank closed. You're nothing in this town. Maybe. Wade shifted slightly, subtly placing himself between Bright and Sienna. But I sleep sound at night. Can you say the same? For a moment, violence crackled in the air. Then Bright stepped back, straightening his coat with sharp movements. This isn't over, he said coldly. Either of you, I offered kindness, partnership. Remember that when things get difficult. After he left, Sienna sank onto her stool, legs suddenly weak. Wade turned to her immediately, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You all right? He knows things. About Missouri, about why I left. She looked up at him, fear naked in her eyes. What if he tells everyone? What if Mrs. Garrett believes him? Hey! Wade cupped her face gently. Look at me. Whatever he thinks he knows, whatever lies he spins, we'll face it together. You hear me. You don't understand. If he raises Mrs. Garrett's rent, she'll have to let me go. If he spreads rumors about theft, no one will hire me. I'll have nothing again. You'll have me. The simple certainty in his voice stopped her spiraling thoughts. Wade. I mean it. Whatever comes, we'll handle it together. He stroked his thumbs across her cheekbones. But I don't think it'll come to that. Why not? Because Bright's got secrets of his own. Man doesn't get that rich that fast, plain honest. And there are people in this town who remember things he'd rather forget. Mrs. Garrett appeared from the front room, her face grim. I heard enough of that to turn my stomach. That man gets bolder every year. You heard, Sienna's heart sank, about Missouri. I heard a desperate man making threats because a woman had the backbone to refuse him. Mrs. Garrett crossed her arms. As for whatever he thinks he knows about Missouri, I don't care. You've proved yourself here. That's what matters. But if he raises your rent, let him try. I've got a signed lease for another 2 years, and my husband's lawyer would love nothing better than to take Edward Bright down a peg. She looked at Wade, though I suspect you've got plans of your own in that regard. Wade's expression was carefully neutral. Don't know what you mean. Mrs. Garrett studied him. Just remember, some fights are better won with paper than fists. That evening, Wade walked Sienna to Martha's as had become their custom, but instead of leaving at the gate, he hesitated. There's something I need to tell you, he said, about what I meant earlier, about you having me. Sienna's pulse quickened. Wade, let me finish. I've been thinking, these past weeks, about what I want, what matters. He took her hands. I came west running from grief. Figured if I worked hard enough, kept my head down, I could outrun the pain of losing Samuel, build something he'd be proud of. You have built something. A job, a reputation, but not a life. His hands tightened on hers. Not until you make me want more than just getting through each day. You make me want a future. What are you saying? I'm saying Edward Bright was right about one thing. You should have a ring on your finger. My ring, if you'll have me. He met her eyes steadily. I know it's fast. I know you've got every reason to say no. But I also know I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Sienna's breath caught. Wade Hunter, are you proposing to me? I am. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Though I meant to do it better, had a whole speech planned. Something about building a life together, facing whatever comes. But then Bright threatened you, and all I could think was how I wanted the right to protect you, legal and proper. I don't need protection. I know. You're the strongest woman I've ever met. But I want to stand beside you anyway. Fight your battles with you. Not for you. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket. This was my mother's. Samuel saved it for his girl someday. But, well, I think he'd approve. The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small garnet, worn smooth by years. It caught the lamplight like a drop of blood, or a promise. It's not fancy, Wade said quietly. Nothing like what Bright could offer, but it's real, like what I feel for you. Sienna stared at the ring, then at Wade's face, earnest and vulnerable and hopeful. This man who'd shown her kindness when she deserved mockery, who'd defended her without being asked, who'd whispered her name through fever dreams. You barely know me, she whispered. I know enough. I know you work hard and treat people fair. I know you've got courage that puts most men to shame. I know you stayed by my bed for 4 days straight. His voice dropped. I know I love you. Have since you fixed my gloves with such care it near broke my heart. Love. The word felt foreign on her tongue, precious and terrifying. Too much too fast. He started to pull back, but she caught his hand. No, not too much. She touched the ring gently. Wade, I need you to understand something. All my life, people have left, my mother, employers, friends. I've built walls so high I forgot what it felt like to trust. And then you came along with your torn gloves and quiet persistence. And suddenly those walls don't seem so necessary anymore. Is that a yes? That's a, I'm terrified, but I want to try. She met his eyes. I want to build something with you, something real and lasting, something that won't disappear when times get hard. Times are already hard, he pointed out. Bright's not going to make them easier. Then we'd better face them together. She held out her hand. Yes, Wade Hunter, I'll marry you, ring and all. His hands shook slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. When? He asked, voice rough with emotion. Soon, before Bright can cause more trouble. She curled her fingers, feeling the weight of the ring. Before I lose my nerve. You won't lose your nerve. You're the bravest person I know. He pulled her close, and she went willingly, fitting against him like she belonged there. I promise you, Sienna, I'll be the man you deserve, the husband you can count on. I know, she whispered against his chest. I think I knew from the beginning. I was just too scared to admit it. And now? Now I'm still scared. But you were right, being scared together is better than being scared alone. He kissed her forehead gently. A promise and a blessing. Together, then, whatever comes. As they stood there in the lamplight, Sienna felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, hope unmarred by fear. Edward Bright could threaten, gossips could whisper, but none of it mattered. She had Wade Hunter, and he had her, and together they would build something worth keeping. I love you too, she said quietly, the words feeling new and true on her lips. In case that wasn't clear, his arms tightened around her. It's clear, crystal clear. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Bright wouldn't accept defeat easily. The town would have opinions about their quick engagement. Life would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, standing in Martha's garden with a simple ring on her finger and a good man's arms around her, Sienna Clay allowed herself to believe in happiness. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The first snow of winter began to fall as evening settled over Hollow Bluff. Sienna sat on Martha's porch, wrapped in Wade's spare coat, watching the flakes drift down like tiny promises. Tomorrow was their wedding day, a simple ceremony at the church, followed by cake at Martha's boarding house. Nothing fancy, but real in theirs. Can't sleep either, Wade's voice came from the shadows. He emerged into the lamplight, his hat dusted with snow. You shouldn't be here, Sienna said without heat. Bad luck to see the bride before the wedding? Figure we've had our share of bad luck already. He sat beside her on the bench, careful not to touch. Wanted to make sure you hadn't changed your mind. Wade Hunter, after everything we've been through, you think I'd run now? No. He smiled slightly. But I wanted to see you anyway. One more time as Sienna Clay. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the dusty street into something clean and new. The town was quiet. Most folks tucked in for the night. Even the saloon was subdued. Only a few die-hard card players still at their games. I've been thinking, Sienna said finally, about what you said that first day, about trusting how you treat me, not your words. Yeah, you were right. Every kind thing you did, the water, the food, the gloves, they all said more than any pretty speech could have. She turned to look at him. But tonight, I want the words too. Tell me something true. Wade, tell me why you chose me. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. You know what I saw that first day. A woman standing in the street with her whole world crumbling. And instead of crying or begging, she lifted her chin and faced it head on. That took courage most men don't have. He shifted slightly, still not touching her, but somehow closer. Then you took whatever work you could find, helped Martha without being asked, treated everyone with dignity, even when they whispered behind your back. You could have been bitter, could have given up. Instead, you built something new. I was barely surviving. No, you were choosing to survive. There's a difference. Now he did touch her, just her hand, his fingers warm against the cold. And when I got hurt, you stayed. 4 nights. Sienna. You could have visited during proper hours like everyone else. Instead, you stayed. Of course I stayed. I couldn't. She stopped, swallowing hard. I couldn't lose you. That's when I knew for sure. When I woke up and you were still there, looking like you'd fought the devil himself to keep me breathing. His thumb traced the ring on her finger. I thought cowboys were cruel, you told me once. I was wrong. No, you were right. Some are. Maybe most are. He looked out at the falling snow. But I promise to change your mind. Show you that some of us know how to be gentle. How to stay. Sienna leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and soap and something uniquely Wade. You did change my mind. About cowboys. About trust. About everything. Good. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Because tomorrow I'm making promises in front of God and everybody, and I need you to believe I'll keep them. I believe you. They sat quietly as the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. Somewhere a coyote called, lonely in the darkness. The sound made Sienna shiver, but Wade's solid presence kept the cold at bay. I should go. He said eventually. Martha will have my hide if she catches me out here. Says it's improper. Since when have we been proper? Fair point. But he stood anyway, brushing snow from his shoulders. Sienna. Yes? Thank you for taking a chance on a quiet cowboy with torn gloves and too much hope. Thank you, she countered, for seeing more in a stranded seamstress than everyone else did. He touched his hat brim, that gesture she'd come to love, and started to leave. Then he turned back. One more thing. That first note I left you, about not letting their laughter write your story. I still have it, pressed in my Bible. Good, because tomorrow we start writing a new story. Our story. And I promise you, it's going to be a good one. After he left, Sienna remained on the porch a while longer. The snow had covered the street completely now, hiding the ruts and scars beneath a fresh canvas. Like her life, she thought. All the pain and mistakes of the past covered over, ready for new paths to be made. She thought about the girl who'd stepped off that stagecoach months ago, humiliated, desperate, alone. That girl would never have imagined this moment, would never have believed that heartbreak could lead to happiness, that a cruel joke could become the greatest gift. But then that girl hadn't met Wade Hunter yet. I thought cowboys were cruel, she whispered to the snowy night, echoing her own words from that first week. The girl she'd been had believed that, had built her whole worldview around that certainty. Tomorrow she would marry a cowboy, a man who'd proved with every action that kindness could wear spurs and a dusty hat, who'd shown her that some people stayed, some promises were kept, some love was worth the risk. Inside the house, she heard Martha moving about, probably making last-minute preparations for tomorrow. The whole town would come, even those who'd laughed at first. Mrs. Garrett had made her a new dress as a wedding gift. Dr. Morrison would stand as Wade's best man. Even some of the cowboys from the Mackenzie Ranch had promised to attend, cleaned up and civilized for the occasion. It would be a simple wedding, nothing like the grand affair she'd dreamed of as a girl. No fancy church in St. Louis, no reception at a hotel, no honeymoon to exotic places. Just two people making promises in a small Texas town, surrounded by folks who'd watched their love grow from suspicion to trust to something unshakable. It was perfect. Sienna stood, shaking the snow from Wade's coat. Tomorrow she would walk down that aisle in her new dress, take the hand of a good man, and speak vows she meant with every fiber of her being. Tomorrow she would become Sienna Hunter, choosing love over fear, trust over doubt. But tonight, she was still Sienna Clay, The girl who'd traveled west on a lie and found truth. Who'd lost everything and gained more than she'd ever dared hope for. Who'd learned that not all cowboys were cruel, that one. At least knew how to be gentle with a wounded heart. She went inside, where warmth and light waited. Martha looked up from her sewing last-minute adjustments to the wedding dress. "Did you see him off?" the older woman asked with knowing eyes. "I did." "And are you ready for tomorrow?" Sienna touched the ring on her finger, thinking of Wade's words, their story, a good one. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." That night, she slept deeply and dreamlessly, the snow continuing to fall outside her window. And when morning came, bringing her wedding day, she woke with a smile on her face and certainty in her heart. The girl who'd believed all cowboys were cruel was gone, transformed by patient love and steady kindness. In her place stood a woman who knew better, who'd learned that sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as disasters. That sometimes you had to travel 1,000 miles to find home. That sometimes a torn glove and a quiet voice could change everything. As she dressed in her wedding finery, Sienna whispered a thank you to the universe that had brought her here, for the false advertisement that had been real providence, for the humiliation that had led to hope, for the cowboy who'd whispered, "Then sleep, I'll change your mind." He had changed her mind about everything. And now, with snow blessing their union and love warming their hearts, they would change their lives together, build something lasting in this harsh land, prove that trust, once earned, could weather any storm. The church bells began to ring, calling the town to witness. Sienna took one last look in the mirror, seeing not the desperate girl from the stagecoach, but the woman she'd become strong, sure, and ready to embrace her future. "Then sleep," she murmured to her reflection, remembering that night on the porch, remembering Wade's promise. "I'll change your mind." He had, how he had, and that had changed everything. The fire crackles, the town fades. The girl who once believed in heartbreak begins, finally, to believe in home, and in the arms of a cowboy who knew how to be gentle. She finds both. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love and redemption in the Old West. I hope Sienna and Wade's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. I'd love to know where you're listening to this story. Are you driving through the countryside, relaxing at home, or perhaps even somewhere in the great American West? Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And if you really want to help more people discover these authentic tales of frontier life and love, please hit the hype button. It truly makes a difference in sharing these stories with fellow Western romance enthusiasts. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love to change hearts. And remember, not all cowboys are cruel. Some of them just might change your mind.